everyone, this is Dr. Eric Block, and welcome to another episode of the Deals for Dentists podcast. All right, so today we have Ben Tuinei. Did I say that right?
That's perfect.
And you are the president of Veritas Dental Resources, and you're from Lehi, Utah?
Yes, I live in Lehi, Utah, but I'm originally from the South Pacific, from a tiny island nation called American Samoa. But I'm fully Americanized now since I've been here for more than 20 years.
Okay, so you moved here 20 years ago?
I moved here in 1999. I was recruited by the University of Arizona to play football for the old Wildcats. And I see that you have a Patriots logo there on your chair.
Yeah.
Teddy Bruschi, he was already playing with the Patriots at the time, but he would come over and to the spring training camps and sort of help out and stuff. And I had a great opportunity to sit with him and to work out with him a number of times. And then of course you had Junior Seau that went over to the Patriots. So I know a few people that played for your team. Is that your favorite team, the Patriots?
Oh yeah, totally. So what position did you play?
Yeah. I played defensive line.
Okay.
I probably don't look it now. I'm a lot lighter than I used to be, but I played on the D line back in those days.
Any chance that you could have gone pro?
I could have. I had a really bad neck injury. Actually, my very first year, I landed in the ER after practice. I got a really, really bad neck injury. I was coming in as a freshman and then ended up redshirting that year. My coach was Dick Tomey at the time, and he said that every Tuinei, he's had 4 people with my last name, a few of my cousins that played for him when he was coaching at the University of Hawaii. And then when he moved to University of Arizona, every Tuinei, he says, has come out of high school really strong and solid. And he was predicting that I'd probably land in maybe the 3rd or 4th round, but if I work hard, I can get to at least the 2nd round. He's like, you're probably not in the category to be drafted in the 1st round. Usually that's reserved for skilled players like quarterbacks, wide receivers. In those days, it was very rare to see linemen drafted 1st or 2nd round. They usually landed in the 3rd or 4th round. But I got a neck injury and decided to play it safe. A lot of my mentors told me that football, even if you do make it to the pro level, it's a very short lifespan. The average players only play 3 years professionally. Right. And so you have to prepare yourself mentally for what's beyond those 3 years if you're lucky to last for 3 years. And I just decided, you know what, I'm gonna do it now. I'm not gonna wait. I'm just gonna give up football altogether and save my body and hopefully save my life. And here we are today, 20 years later.
So did you play all 4 years in college?
I didn't. I actually played 2 years. I sustained a neck injury year 1, and then year 2, I re-agitated it almost every practice. And at that point, I decided, if it's going to continue this way and flare up, it's probably not worth the long-term risk. The doctors really didn't know. My injury was very unique. It wasn't something that they thought that was going to cause any short-term damage, but they said the more it flares up, then it could become a potential problem for your spine. Being that it was a neck injury, you don't want to mess with those, that type of injury. And so they laid out all the risk, although they didn't have enough sampling at the time of other players that had the exact same symptoms. So I played 2 years and decided, I'm just going to play it safe, and I never really aspired. I never really thought that I would take football professionally. I always thought, my family background, my mom was a PhD and my dad was an attorney. And I always thought that my path would either go maybe to the educational side or to the legal side. And I landed halfway in between. I'm not a lawyer. I'm certainly not a PhD. But I can argue with the best of the best. I think I can argue with the best of the best out there. At least I have. When you talk about insurance companies and negotiating with them, I think that's, this is more work that attorneys would do. Even though I'm not an attorney, I kind of feel like I've landed in that nice sweet spot between my father and my mother's professions as, what they did for a living.
So now you're a PPO specialist. So you can go to Deals for Dentists and check out Veritas's promo offer. And Ben is offering a complimentary PPO analysis and a 25% discount off their services if you mention Deals for Dentists. veritasdentalresources.com. So where did the name Veritas come from?
Good question, Dr. Block. Veritas is a Latin word that stands for truth. um, this is my third company that I built, that in dental at least. The first two companies we did the same thing. We provided fee negotiating and credentialing services, but we did a little bit more. We did marketing services. We did a little bit more hands-on work in the dental practices. When my wife and I sold the last company that I had half ownership in, we decided to rebrand and just rename a new effort that only she and I would own and operate. And she came up with this phrase, or at least this name Veritas, saying, when you deal with insurance companies, whether you're a dentist or physician or a patient, you don't really get the truth from them. Mm-hmm. And we figured creating a business name that spoke to who we are in terms of our mission probably meant more than just picking a random name or naming the business after our names. So we came up with Veritas Dental Resources, with the tagline that you can't find it's hard to find the truth from insurance companies. So Veritas exists to help you pursue the truth when it comes to negotiating contracts, coding, and you name it, as it pertains to dealing with insurance companies. So Veritas Dental Resources is specifically for dentists or dental practices to negotiate fees and to really unveil that hidden area of transparency between doctors and dentists. And I think we do a pretty decent job at it.
So Ben, how did you first get involved in dentistry? How did you come up with Veritas and get involved in the PPO insurance industry?
Yeah, good question. It was actually an accident. I didn't really intend to get into dentistry. I was working as a fundraiser before I did any of this that I'm doing today. Fundraisers, basically, my connection with professional athletes, people that I went to school with that played in the NFL or the NBA. I was recruited by a firm in New York City to raise funds to build big projects. These projects range from building sky rises to assisting cities in building stadiums or revamping stadiums, rehabilitation in stadiums. And a friend of mine in Arizona was working with a relatively small or medium-sized DSO. They did about 100 million a year, between 50 and 100 million a year. A lot of which, that revenue comes straight from dealing with insurance companies. They contacted me because they needed a fresh set of eyes to look at their numbers, and they knew full well that I didn't have any experience in dental, and that wasn't important to them. They just needed somebody with a business sense to come and take a look at things. And I did. I flew out to Phoenix and I spent several days with them, looked at all of their numbers, their collection reports, accounts receivables, production numbers, insurance contracts, you name it. It didn't take me too long to realize and figure out that they were writing off about 50% or more in some situations of the treatment that they were producing. And their office fees weren't set even at the right standard as well. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was kind of odd that a business would allow itself to lose $50 million a year in write-offs. Wow. And so I started to poke holes at their contracts and pointed out the fact that, like on a periodic exam, they agreed to do those for free for a lot of patients. Mm. X-rays, they agreed to do those for free. And on the contracted fee schedules, the dollar amount for reimbursement was zero for a lot of these insurance companies. But even things like pro fees, in Phoenix, where at that time, the 80th percentile of fees for an adult pro fee was around $80. They were collecting $30 from a lot of plans. Crowns, they were collecting maximum allowed amount between $350 to $550. These are fees from the 1980s, basically. Mm-hmm. And they were, they had a stamp on them. 2007 is when these fees were actually in contract. And I thought it was quite odd that nobody really addressed this problem, or even nobody allowed these insurance carriers to sort of have a system of checks and balances, or at least attempt to negotiate with them in an effort to reduce this huge gap of what I found is a $50 million gap of lost revenue because they didn't negotiate fees or set up their contracts in the right way. So I put together a report, recommendations, and I met with the CEO for an hour, and I gave him my recommendations. And not too long into my spiel and on how we can correct a lot of these problems, he hired me. He said, "I want to offer you a job. I don't care what you want in terms of compensation. If what you're saying can be collected, we'll give it at least 6 months. And if you can do what you're saying we should be doing, then of course we'll honor your salary." Well, it didn't take me too long. I took the job simply because it was less travel. Being a fundraiser, you're traveling all the time, and I don't know about you, but travel is great if you're doing maybe one trip a month. But when you're doing 3 trips a day, it becomes very, very tiring. So I took this job with the intent to deliver everything that I found on the deliverables on what we could achieve for them, or at least what can be achieved. And I started negotiating fees. Within 3 months, we started to compare revenue. 3 months, boom, $1 million recaptured. Another 3 months, boom, another $1 million recaptured.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I started to realize that as this group was growing, I needed to hire somebody to duplicate myself so that we could scale this process within this group. Well, when I put out ads on monster.com and, those days, the old Craigslist, I don't even know if Craigslist is still available today. I couldn't find anybody that had the experience that I was looking for. Nobody came forward and said, "I know how to negotiate fees with insurance company." Mm-hmm. Nobody. I try to go out and find companies that could help us do this. No companies existed.
Now, was this a large DSO that you were helping?
Yes. In fact, I contacted other DSOs. This DSO in Arizona wasn't too big. They were relatively new. They eventually sold off to other DSOs. But I contacted Pacific Dental. I contacted Western Dental out of California. And they had no idea what I was talking about. So this concept of negotiating fees was even foreign to those big groups. Mm-hmm. But that's essentially how I got started in dentistry. And that's actually how I got this whole thought process of, well, if nobody's offering this as a service, I might as well put my name out there, or at least myself out there, to start one, to get, because I recognized there was a need in the industry that wasn't being addressed. And
so it sounds like it was like the perfect storm for this office that you first got started with. They weren't collecting what they were supposed to be collecting. They were leaving a lot of revenue on the table. They hadn't increased their fees. They weren't. It sounds like they were just being lazy. And then you add in the other factor where you're negotiating to get higher fees. So it sounds like it created a perfect storm for a lot of revenue. And it's not like they had to work any harder to get this revenue. They were doing the work. They just weren't getting compensated for it, or weren't, collecting properly or billing properly.
Exactly. That was another big one. On a lot of accounts, they weren't billing, they weren't sending in buildups. And I asked them why. They said, well, these insurance companies don't pay for buildups. And Cigna was one of them. And I looked into it further. I contacted Cigna, got a copy of their dental resource guide, and boom, it said, we cover buildups. But if you submit the buildup, well, there was some language in there that basically stated that if you don't report the seat date, then we'll combine the buildup with the crown into a single reimbursement. But those were all clearly outlined in those agreements.
Right.
And so, we went back and we started billing everything that we could within, the 1-year restriction on timely filing. And we quickly learned, within 30 days, we learned that the group was doing it wrong all along. Right. They were performing treatment that just simply wasn't being billed out. They just didn't have a good grasp of understanding on coding. But the interesting thing, Dr. Block, so this was, back in 2007. For many practices today, it's the same story. They a lot of practices are unaware of what they're entitled to bill or entitled to collect. So instead of, they submit things to insurance, but instead of appealing them, they just let those denials go unchallenged. And most certainly most practices still let fee schedules go unnegotiated.
Yeah.
So while we're over 10 years into this, it's still very much a need in the dental industry where practices, chances are practice still has a lot of opportunity to capture revenue from negotiating and implementing good billing practices.
Now, what's your process, and do you help the solo practitioner to the multi-specialty practice to the DSOs? Do you help all practices negotiate fees and analyze their insurance participation?
Absolutely. We help practices of all sizes. We have clients that range from a single doctor doing 200,000 in revenue to a DSO that has 300 to 400 locations doing, you know, millions upon millions in revenue a year. And the nice thing about that is that we have a very wide range of, well, we have a lot of clients and we have lots of data that we can analyze. And
Mm-hmm.
really that's the key for negotiations is you have to have data to know if a potential client is even eligible to negotiate. So our process is, you know, in terms of looking at how we do things, it's very similar to how dentists treat patients. You know, you do a new patient exam to assess and diagnose needs, and we do the same thing. We have a
Mm-hmm.
questionnaire that we complete over a 30 to 60-minute consultation over the phone. And that's our new patient exam where we gather all the information that we need to determine if a dentist is even eligible to negotiate or if we need to restructure their insurance contracts in a way that allow them to be more profitable. Once we identify those issues and engage in our form of diagnostics, we'll then put together a treatment plan for a doctor to outline exactly what they need to know, which PPO contracts they're on that they're losing money with that they can negotiate, potential plans to drop, potential dental plans to consolidate under umbrella networks. But overall, just a real clear picture on what the opportunity is to increase the reimbursements to a significant level with most of the dental plans that they participate with. That's how we come up with our quote too. Just like a dental practice, we have a fee schedule that's based
Mm-hmm.
upon the work that we're doing, the specific work that we're doing for them.
Now, how do you compare like the small solo practitioner versus the large DSO? Is the large DSO has a big network on the back end that's helping them out? Do they seem to have things more under control, or is that can that be a surprise where sometimes these large DSOs also need a big boost in negotiation and PPO help with their PPOs?
That's a good question. It depends on the DSO. Like some DSOs are really on top of things that may have more years of experience in the management component of dentistry. Well-established DSOs, this is something that they focus on in-house. And we communicate with a lot of them. Most of the DSOs out there, we know exactly where they're at in terms of the health of their insurance departments. The vast majority of them still need a lot of help. Compared to solo practitioners, where it's a smaller operation, where you can easily change things and implement negotiations much quicker, we do find that the speed of implementation on the negotiations is much faster in a solo practitioner office versus a large DSO. In terms of leverage, some DSOs claim that they have more leverage than a solo practitioner. Well, that may be true for them simply because when they acquire a new practice that hasn't negotiated fees, they have experience negotiating fees, so therefore they feel like they have more leverage. But the truth is that a solo practitioner has just as much leverage as a DSO when it comes to negotiations. And it's a function of knowledge and data. If you know how to negotiate, if you know that a DSO near you is being paid a higher fee, I would argue that that's considered discrimination. Antitrust, at least the enforceable parts of the antitrust laws that insurance companies still have to abide by, are the restraint in trades as it pertains to price discrimination. If I as an insurance company, I'm going to offer a practice right next door to you a higher fee schedule, I'm going to have legitimate justification as to why I'm discriminating against you and giving that office a higher fee. But here's the problem, Dr. Block. As a solo practitioner, I can't legally go to my neighbor and ask him for a copy of his Cigna or Delta fees without me violating antitrust or the confidentiality agreements within that PPO contract. So it's an uphill battle for a lot of solo practitioners to collect data they need for leverage purposes to negotiate. And that's usually the difference between a DSO and a solo practitioner. It's not a function of ability. It's a function of leverage and data. Do I have the data necessary to point out discrimination to an insurance company when I start negotiating fees? And I guess that's where we come in. having represented almost 7,000 dental offices throughout the United States, we have a lot of data. If an insurance company tells us that we just can't, and we're not going to negotiate for that doctor, well, our question is, well, why not? We have another client that you've negotiated for. You have to justify to me why you're willing to discriminate against this doctor when just last month you gave a fee increase for this guy or this gal, So there's huge leverage when it comes to organizations like ours that aren't bound to the same antitrust rules, because we're part of those practices. We're part of the confidentiality, and the insurance companies know that there's a safety net for us in the sense that we can not necessarily share data with doctors, but we can use doctors' data as a part of the leverage and negotiating process when we're representing other doctors.
So when you say antitrust, is that considered collusion? If I call my neighbor, the dental office down the street, and ask them what their fees are, and take a look at their contract, is that collusion?
It could be considered collusion, to my knowledge. More so, it's a conspiracy to hike fees, to raise fees, and that's what antitrust is. The real enforceable components is that when doctors get together and share feedback in an effort to raise the cost of dental services, that's against the law.
I see.
You're absolutely correct. When you do call another office, you could be accused of both collusion and a conspiracy to raise fees, which both are violations of the antitrust laws.
Yeah, I remember a couple years ago or a few years ago here in Massachusetts, there was the big Delta crisis that was going on where they were going to lower our fees, and the Mass Dental Society got involved, and there was all this fear and talk of how you can't talk about it on group discussions because it's considered collusion. So everyone was all nervous about that, and ask if your friends were going to sign with Delta or not. Which brings me to another question. Say, I contacted you. I need help with our negotiation, but I've already signed a contract with a PPO. How does that work? Can you still come in and negotiate even though I've already just signed a contract with them?
Very good question. It depends. If you sign a new contract with that insurance plan, meaning it's your very first time becoming credentialed with that plan, then chances are the language of that agreement may stipulate that you have to wait 1 year to 24 months before you can negotiate fees. If you're already credentialed with this dental plan, but you simply just added it as a new location to your existing contract with that plan and did not sign a fee agreement, then you're likely eligible to still negotiate. But even let's say you engage in brand new credentialing with that dental plan, and that dental plan is negotiable. If data exists that shows that another doctor recently signed up with that plan but has a higher fee schedule, that's leverage. So I would never. I would definitely try to find out, even if you just enrolled with a new dental plan, if you can negotiate, because in the end, the leverage is going to be the telltale on whether you're eligible to negotiate this year. But also, you have to recognize that there's a contract in place that you sign. Worst case scenario, you may need to cancel that contract and redo it, which has some pros and cons to it. But I recommend talking to a professional so that you understand what all of your options are in terms of negotiations at that stage of the contract with PPOs.
So can you explain how you actually negotiate with an insurance company? Do you show up to their office and put them in a headlock and tell them to get us better fees? Do you threaten to walk away? Like I tell Comcast that I want to get a better deal on my cable, and I tell them I'm going to leave and sign up with Verizon, and all of a sudden they have a great discount for me. What's your process in actually negotiating?
Absolutely. So it's a very detailed 7 steps process that we use, but essentially, we don't show up to the insurance companies anymore. we used to in the past, and oftentimes when you're dealing with an insurance company, you're probably dealing with people that are not in the same state. So the nice thing is that when you negotiate, you're likely only going to deal with them over the phone, over email. which makes it easy for a dental office to at least manage that level of communication. And that's exactly what we do. We work in all 50 states. The very first place that we start with the dental practice is that initial new patient exam. That new patient exam, it really helps us design the entire process for that particular dental practice. And we can create a very detailed plan of attack on how to negotiate with insurance companies. But it all starts with your prep. You have to do a very impressive, or at least a very meticulous preparation process that assesses your fees, your leverage, area averages in terms of your standard office fees in comparison to where you're at right now. Identifying your top codes, what downgrade codes the insurance companies are downgrading to most frequently. As an example, you may not carry amalgam, but if a lot of your posterior composites are being downgraded to amalgam, that should be included in the negotiations. What PFMs are being used as downgrades, as an example as well. So you go through that very detailed assessment of your insurance department to look at everything, sort of perform like a SWOT analysis on your insurance department. Once that's complete, so that's kind of like your crown prep. You have everything that you need to negotiate with that prep work. When you initiate negotiations with insurance companies, I recommend, at least the way we do it is we always initiate communication via writing, whether it's a direct letter to them or a trackable email to them where we know if they've opened it or not. Written communication with insurance companies is so vital, because if they make a promise and then they recant on that promise down the road, you'll at least have a communication chain where you can track promises and enforce promises. Actually, a most recent example, on Friday, I got an email from a dentist in New Jersey who was promised a higher fee schedule from Cigna. And we've been coaching him through this process for the last several months. Around June, Cigna came back and said, well, we can't offer you that fee schedule anymore because I made a mistake as a Cigna representative and gave you the wrong fee schedule. So the doctor came to me and says, is that true? I looked at the negotiated offer and said, absolutely not. That's a complete lie, because there's another client we have right next door that has the same negotiated rate. So the Cigna rep sent him an offer fee schedule that was 20% less than the original offer. And the Cigna rep's mentality was take it or leave it. You can either contract or don't. And my recommendation to this doctor said, don't contract. Stick to your guns. Just hold your ground. And I guarantee you, within a month or two, the Cigna rep's going to come back desperate to have a new provider sign on. That's how they get paid. And he did. He listened to my advice. And on Friday, Cigna came back and said, hey, we'll give you the old fee schedule. So
it's the ability to walk away, right? There's no better, although, there's no better leverage than the ability to walk away. But what about the big boys like Delta? And so we have COVID, that was a silver lining of COVID, is that actually gave us a chance to kind of reset and reevaluate our insurance participation. And we had a major capacity issue where we couldn't get all these patients in. So we started to go out of network with some PPOs. We're still in network with Blue Cross and Delta. But, how is it trying to negotiate with Delta, is Delta the largest PPO out there? Are they the biggest?
In most states they are. They don't have the number one spot in many states, but like in Massachusetts, definitely they are number one. So the problem with Delta Dental, and this is another article that I'm preparing for Dental Economics, is Delta brags about how they're endorsed by 99% of the dentists in any given community in the United States. And they use that phrase, we are endorsed by the doctors. And that's actually not true, right? I don't think any dentist fully endorses Delta, but you participate with them simply because you have to in an effort to retain that patient base. Well, what we've learned, another silver lining with this pandemic, is that we've had a lot of clients just not necessarily give up on Delta, but just they decided to not tolerate Delta anymore. So we have a lot of data just in the last 5 months of dental practices that decided to cancel their Delta agreements or engage in negotiations that actually resulted in successful negotiations. Like the state of Washington we started to receive fee increases from Delta for many of our clients in June and July. I just received another notice this morning for a client in Washington that received a fee increase. So there's always that possibility that you can negotiate with the impossible. But in terms of walking out of the Delta contracts, I can list well over 100. I 5 names pop in my mind right now of dentists that I know that have successfully dropped a Delta or a Blue Cross. And here's the interesting thing, Dr. Block. They dropped Delta Dental. Right now, they're on pace to lose roughly 21% of their patients. But at the same time, they are on pace to increase their overall revenue by 13%. Now, practices that have dropped Delta last year and the year before, this is what we see. They would lose approximately 30% of their Delta patient base. And I know that's a very, very scary number. But the actual rate of increase in the practice as a whole has been almost 10%, between 7 and 10% increase in total practice revenue as a result of seeing fewer Delta patients. So this is where the whole Kodak study is applied. If you're not familiar with the Kodak study, I recommend that you search it online. But the Kodak study, I have it printed on my wall. It essentially says that if you lose 45% of your sales volume, or in this case, your patient base, but increase your fees by 20%, you're at a break-even point. Meaning for the patients that stay, you're collecting 20% more on your fees. You're making the exact same money off of 50 to 55% of those patients that are actually staying. And I know we don't want to lose that many of our patients, but the thing with Delta is that if dental practices don't start to protest that quote unquote endorsement, meaning Delta uses that to the employer saying, we're endorsed by all the doctors. If you don't start protesting that, it's going to be virtually impossible to negotiate with Delta in the future. Fortunately, many states have started that process to negotiate with Delta, and that armor that Delta has had for the last number of years in terms of it being the non-negotiable plan, well, there's a chink in that armor. And that process is being duplicated in many states. So even while Delta may not be negotiable in some states, I can guarantee within the next 5 years, Delta is going to start to negotiate like they have in states like California, Washington, Arizona, where they're making special deals with some offices. And I know Delta, if they listen to this, they're not going to be happy about what I'm saying. But the truth is, in my opinion, based upon my experience, every plan is negotiable. You just have to have the right leverage.
Yeah. And, like I said, COVID was the silver lining was, we had a capacity issue. We couldn't fit all of our patients into the schedule. We added more time per appointment. We have a staggered schedule. So something had to give. We couldn't see all these patients. So we started dropping some of the PPOs. Now, for an office like mine that's been around since, the office was started in 1974, and I've been there for 17 years. So there's been a big, long, loyal following that some patients we're going to lose. Other patients we have a good relationship with, and they're willing to pay a little more out of pocket as an out-of-network provider. But what's your advice for a new practice that's just starting out that needs that volume discount? And that's what Delta is. They're a volume discount. You're signing a deal with the devil where you're getting a big volume of patients, but you play by their rules and their fees. So for a larger practice that's been around for a while, like ours, maybe we can withstand that. But what about a brand new office that's just trying to get on their feet?
Good question. To me, it depends on your risk tolerance. I have a client up in Park City, Utah. She decided to only participate with one dental plan. Well, her first month, she produced more revenue than almost any other dental practice I know in Park City. She took a risk. She decided to let her personality shine and to engage in very, very aggressive marketing, the type of marketing where she's the face of her marketing department to the employers, to the school districts, to the small businesses that are there. And she's been preparing for this practice startup for a long, long time, for at least 2 years. She was teaching at a university here locally, opened her office from start from scratch practice in June of this year at the tail end of the pandemic closures in most states, and still was able to produce 1.5% higher. I mean, over 100% higher than most of the practices that we know of in Park City. Now that's an anomaly. Not every practice is going to see those numbers, but is it possible for you to start a fee-for-service from scratch practice? Absolutely. It's been proven time and time again. For most dental practice, and I say most not to insult you by saying you don't have the ability to do that. It's all about your risk tolerance. Are you willing to do what it takes to be aggressive in your marketing and your image and your branding approach as a startup practice, or is it cost effective for you just to deal with the PPOs? Either route to me is not bad. I would say many dentists that don't have the time or the desire even to go out to meet with the employers or become a member of your chambers of commerce and network, like Dr. Kim literally networks like crazy. That's just her personality. She's very, very outgoing that way. Me personally, I don't network that way to that extent. And so if I were doing a startup practice, just with what I know, I would likely create a more aggressive PPO structure, build the PPO opportunity so that I can create enough volume, measured approach with volume. You still want to focus on good quality, but focus on getting as many patients as you can on these PPO contracts, and then start canceling these PPO contracts over time if your desire is to become fee for service. Not every dentist wants to be fee for service, but if you're like me, that I would rather operate a fee for service practice, but I know that I probably don't have the energy to do a fee for service startup. So I would do the PPOs, selectively pick the ones that pay the best, engage in some marketing efforts to increase volume of those patients. And then within a year, I'd start assessing which plans to drop. And then eventually, at least for me, I would definitely probably cancel even Delta Dental down the road, knowing full well that what the Kodak study is all about. Patient loyalty is actually huge. We actually deal with brokers that sell dental insurance to employers across the country. And they will even tell you that patients don't like switching dentists. If they do switch, it's an anomaly according to their numbers. And what that meant to me is that if a patient's dentist decided to cancel Delta Dental, the vast majority of that patient will likely stay. And this is according to the broker data, that the patients normally will stick with their dentist, even though they know they're going to be paying more out of pocket. It's the relationship and the trust in terms of clinical quality that means a lot to these patients. But sometimes, if they're your neighbor and they switch to another dental practice, that's not an indication of the overall loyalty. The brokers are saying that the loyalty is very, very strong in dentistry, that if doctors go out of network, they can still retain most of their patients. So, my line of thinking is that, okay, I'll use the PPOs to gain new patients, but because I know the loyalty factor is going to be huge, I wouldn't hesitate going out of network once I reach like your issue, a capacity issue, or a desired number of active patients or revenue level that I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, I feel like if you're going to do it, it all starts with educating the patient and how the insurance company is not looking out for the best interests of the patient. The insurance company only thinks about money. They want to downgrade, discount, deny, delay, decline, and they want to dictate treatment, and they're not looking out for the best interest of the patient. And I find it to be such a barrier where I have some patients and they've gone through their annual maximum and they need some work and they say, oh, I can't do that work because I'm out of insurance. Well, you can. Yeah, you can. And you need it and you should do it. You're just gonna have to pay out of pocket for it. So I think it all comes down to educating the patient, educating your staff on how to present it like that. And we have a big whiteboard in our lunchroom, which no one eats there anymore. Everyone eats in their car now because of COVID. But I have all our PPOs listed, and we crossed off Cigna, we crossed off Aetna, we crossed off Guardian. We're all out of network with those plans. It's just Delta and Blue Cross left. So, like you're saying, we feel that it's definitely possible we could go out of network with them as well. We may lose some patients, but we have built up a good, strong rapport with a lot of patients that we're hoping will stay with us. But if we started early with the education process and getting it into their brains that, dental insurance isn't even an insurance. It's just a benefit from their employer. And it's, $1,000 annual maximum is probably the same amount that it was in 1980. It's just, it's always a tough barrier to get over, that insurance barrier, especially with the annual maximum issue. We also started our own membership plan within the office for our fee-for-service patients, and that's another avenue that we market to try to reach uninsured patients or patients that lost insurance or that retired. So that's been very popular for our uninsured patients. So what's your your process? You said you have a 7-point process. Is that right? That you go through?
It's a 7 steps process that we use to negotiate on behalf of our clients. I recommend, if any listeners are interested in finding out, whether you're even eligible to negotiate, let's start with just the initial analysis, the new patient exam. And that new patient exam ultimately will tell you exactly what the opportunities are to negotiate. The 7 steps is actually a course that I teach across the country. It's a minimum of a 2-hour course to describe and explain all 7 steps in detail. So perhaps we can, if you're interested, we can do a course for your listeners and guests as well. But in essence, that 7 steps, it's not a secret. It's designed to help, or at least a process that's designed to ensure maximum efficiency when you negotiate with these crazy insurance companies.
All right. Thanks so much, Ben, for joining us. Again, this is Ben Tuinei, the president of Veritas Dental Resources. And mention Deals for Dentists or visit dealsfordentist.com and you can see his promo. He's offering a complimentary PPO analysis and a 25% discount off services if you mention Deals for Dentists. Did I say that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thanks so much for joining us. And let's maybe touch base in about 6 months or so and kind of revisit the trends of PPOs and any new technology that you're using out there. And we'll keep in touch.
That sounds great. Thank you for your time, Dr. Block.
Thanks for joining us.
Okay, take care.
All right. Take care.